Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel and finding your path to your best emotional and physical health. I want to continue our series today on kind of identifying and dealing with complex PTSD and some ideas about how to move forward and heal and deal with some of those symptoms. So again, don't forget to subscribe so you can get notified when new videos come out approximately once a week. And also, please download my 5 free videos on how to get started in your path to your best emotional and physical health. And also, please share this information with anybody who you feel might need it. We love to connect with people in the world and help them through their change and their growth process. So please let everybody know and anybody who needs this information. So with that, I just want to get into talking about the inner critic and how can we shrink the inner critic. When people are struggling with complex PTSD and things that have happened to them as a child, they often have really, really strong negative statements that are told to them as a kid, and they embody those, and being told that they're bad or worthless or all those things. And when we're doing treatment, those come out pretty readily, and they're easily triggered by a number of situations. So we want to kind of figure out how we can work on those things in between sessions and as we're growing to kind of help shrink that inner critic, because it gets pretty powerful. So there is this kind of like adaptation to perfectionism when you're struggling with emotional abuse as a child, and the child develops this idea that you have to be perfect in order to get love or be safe or any of these other things that people are dealing with. So that's kind of where they get that idea that they have to be perfect, and that if they don't, they are all these bad things. So the problem with it is that when it fails to win the approvals of others is perfectionism, because one, we can never be perfect, and two, it's really, really difficult to get to the point where people are going to recognize that, right? And then it just gets worse because the perfectionism is never met, and then we continue to have difficulties with the strive towards perfectionism and then the inner critic, okay? One of my favorite books on this one, by the way, which I recommend anybody pick up who's kind of struggling with this, is Failing Forward by John C. Maxwell. Really kind of puts in perspective on how important failure is as part of the learning process, and that perfectionism never gets us anywhere. So this inner critic is really one of the key aspects of complex PTSD. So we want to go ahead and think about how we can kind of change that. And today I want to go over the 9 ways we can kind of work on shrinking the inner critic and dealing with and identifying them when they happen, okay? So number 1, we have to really reflect, like I said, that perfectionism and perfectionism is unachievable, and failing is really part of learning, and there's really no way around it. We don't really learn from our successes. I mean, we do because we want to repeat them, but we learn probably even more from our failures, because then it's like, okay, well, don't do that and don't do that, and then this is how I'm going to adjust what I'm doing. The other thing that we need to kind of identify and start recognizing takes a little bit more work. This is more from a cognitive behavioral perspective, where we need to identify that we have this all or none thinking, or this black and white thinking that comes with the inner critic, that things are always, things never should be. Those are black and white thinking prospects. So when we kind of find ourselves doing that, we need to stop and say, that's, first of all, it's never accurate, because nothing's 100%. And if you're like me, you can kind of figure out, well, if I say that it's mostly, that's close enough, and it can kind of have the same negative effects. So you kind of have to watch for that as well. So because you're kind of you're looking for the 1% that's not like that, and that's okay, right? So even though things are usually, and I can't think of a good example right now, but things are usually a certain way, instead of saying it's always, you might say, well, it's usually, and that's how you're going to get away with it. But in reality, you want to be the few that isn't part of the usual, right? And you want to basically grow and change so that you can be unique in that way. So the other thing, number 3, is understanding that the critic really comes out as self-hate and disgust and toxic shame. So that's one of the things we really work on when we're doing this kind of work, and to try to learn to love yourself a little bit better and kind of expand that as you can. Another sign of an inner critic, number 4, micromanagement. This one is kind of not always as obvious. And the micromanagement or the worry, the obsessing over things, we've talked about that when we talk about the flight response, that they obsess and try to figure out how to make sure everything's right and it's got to be just so in order to get that approval, whether or not they admit to that or not. Number 5 is devaluing yourself when you compare to others. That's another thing that's a little bit of a challenge and kind of part of the perfectionism process that we need to kind of rein in if we can. It's easy to fall in this in almost anyone's professional world, especially. It's like there's always someone that has a better career or more success or whatever that has happened, and we're not going to achieve that. But we fail to see that somebody else is looking at us that way, right? So we need to understand that there's always going to be something that's better in this way, or that somebody else is going to have achieved a little bit more in this certain area. But just remember that just because they may have achieved more in one area does not mean they've achieved, more in another area. Bill Gates is a perfect example, right? So he's achieved all this financial success and all of that. His relationship success, not so much, because he's getting a divorce, right? So he did not successfully work through that piece of his development. One would assume. Of course, I don't know all the details of that, but that's a real possibility, right? Another one that we need to think about is part of the perfectionism this is number 6, is the guilt. When we have guilt that things aren't done right, or guilt that we haven't done this, that, and the other thing. Guilt that we're missing out on this. Guilt that, we haven't achieved something. All of that is part of that inner critic and signs of that. And we need to work on those statements as well. 7 is the shoulds, okay? We need to change the language, saying that I should do this, I should do that, I should be this, or whatever. We want to change that from should to want. I want to be this. This is my goal, but it doesn't mean should, because shoulds have an attitude of failure. If you don't complete them or don't meet that, then you're no good. That's the message they convey. So shoulds, shoulda, coulda, wouldas. We laugh and we kind of joke about this in the therapy sessions sometimes, is that you should all over yourself. We don't want to do that. We want to tell ourselves that we want this and this is our goal, but that we need to work towards it and not should all over ourselves when we don't finish it or we don't complete it or whatever. And we learn to let go of that stuff. Number 8, signs of overworking and workaholism and overproductivity. We've talked about that in the flight video. Those people, that's a sign of perfectionism. They have to work because they should be productive, right? So it kind of ties in all these different levels of inner critic and identifying that they can only achieve love or connection if they do those things, if they complete everything that they should, right? And number 9 is kind of harsh judgments of themselves and others. So if you find yourself judging even others, because a lot of times they can do the outward, and we know this on an emotional level, that people that kind of do everything on an outward basis and are constantly judging others, a lot of the times that they are struggling with their own inner critic, and they do that to turn the focus away from what they're doing because it's too uncomfortable to feel that they have something going on inside, or they're criticizing themselves. So it's much easier to just criticize other people. So we kind of have to identify that, and in therapy we might speak to that. It's like, what is it about yourself that you are avoiding or afraid of, that you need to judge other people as kind of a smoke and mirrors effect? Okay, so those are kind of the 9 signs of inner critic that we can kind of work on with as we develop and kind of heal the complex PTSD patterns. So if you think you might need some more help regarding this and you want to kind of move through some things and you need some coaching, please connect with me on the website. We'll make sure we get that set up for you. So thanks everybody, and have a great day.